Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode. If you are enjoying listening to us, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or even our website. We love to hear from y'all. And every now and then we also showcase those reviews. So please leave one and like and subscribe. Of course, we love when y'all do that. So today is a really interesting podcast. We have Gabriel Rio. He has over a decade of experience in the oil and gas environmental service industry. He is currently the president and CEO of Milestone Environmental Services and has spent his entire career in waste management, which is really interesting because a lot of people that we've had on the podcast are directly like in production, operations, or completions, but we've never really talked about like what happens to all that waste. So Gabriel, thank you so much for coming on. And can you tell us where does all the waste actually go?
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you guys both for having me on. I really appreciate it. I've been a fan of the podcast for a long time, and I'm really honored to be here talking with you both today. So thank you. But to your question about where the waste goes, that is a dynamic and changing thing. So when I first got into the oil field, it was actually 18 years ago, so almost 2 decades now. But most of the oil field waste was really, and that's when I say oil field waste, I'm talking about drill cuttings, spent drilling fluids, a whole bunch of different things. Most of that waste was really being left on lease. So, you dig a reserve pit behind a drilling rig. Some of that waste will go into the reserve pit during the drilling process, and it might just be buried on site and left there. Or it might be taken out of the reserve pit and then spread on ranch land or farmland behind where the drilling rig is and tilled in with the soil. Those are kind of older practices that have been around as long as the oil field has been around. They're still legal in Texas and Oklahoma and a couple of other states. But Milestone's really kind of been, and what I've been focused on during my career is trying to provide operators a better alternative so that we don't have to leave our waste on site. So we don't have to expose the ranches to potential for soil contamination or groundwater contamination. We don't have to generate emissions when those hydrocarbons that are in the waste evaporate or biodegrade. So provide them a better alternative so we can protect the land, and we can also reduce those sources of emissions and try to keep things clean. So that's what we do.
That's amazing, especially now with the whole world being focused on ESG, and it's such an important, for the oil field as well to take care of the planet. So I think it's right in line with kind of where the world is shifting towards. So that's incredible. Well, we'll find out a little bit more about Milestone once we get more deep into your episode. So let's start from the very beginning. Can you tell us what life was like growing up as a chemical engineer in a family of chemical engineers as well that had a love for Dow chemicals? It seems that a lot of your family members worked there as you were growing up. So tell us a little bit of what that dynamic was like.
Yeah, we're going way back now. So my mom, my dad, both of my grandfathers, aunts and uncles had a whole bunch of family that have worked for Dow Chemical. And it was a neat experience growing up. But it kind of afforded us lots of opportunities to move around, kind of like working for Schlumberger, right? It took us from Texas to Brazil and back, and then up to Michigan for 10 years and then back. But it was a really good experience, and that was a great company. When I was growing up, everybody I knew was in the chemical industry. Everybody my parents knew was they were either a doctor or they were in the chemical industry. And so I really thought those were the two career options that were out there when I was a kid. I didn't know there was anything else. I had a suspicion that there might be more. But when I was a kid, that was what you did, was kind of get a chemical engineering degree and then and go that way.
Well, naturally, you did that, right? You got your chemical engineering degree, given that your whole family did it. And it seemed like, like you said, that was one of the only paths. But, you also spoke about having a passion for singing. Did you ever regret not pursuing a career in singing? It does seem very different than, what your whole family was doing at the time. And with that said, like, is there any advice that you would give the younger talent individuals who don't know, if they want to pursue their passion or go get a degree like chemical engineering, because, singing can be a difficult industry to get into as well. So can you speak a little bit on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, when I was younger, I mean, like you said, I really loved music. I really loved singing. But I also knew that, I mean, I was kind of a nerd about it, right? I really loved classical music. I was never going to be a rock star, right? I'm just not nearly that cool. I was
You
never going
have
to
the
be a rock
looks
star.
for it though.
Yeah, I could see it. I could see it.
Yeah.
But it's, yeah, so I was never going that route. But I think it's a matter of, you have to know yourself, right? And so I knew that I loved music, and I knew that that was something that I wanted to pursue, but I was also just really into math and science and all that kind of stuff. And so I knew that neither, like, dropping either one of those things was not really going to be fulfilling for me, right? So the way I kind of evolved in that is I decided, look, music's going to be a hobby for me, but I'm going to try to do it at a high level. Engineering and business is going to be how I'm going to kind of build my career. So for me, I've kept up with music, and I actually was very involved in music at UT when I was there. Have sung with the New York Philharmonic, sung with the Houston Symphony.
Wow.
Over the years when I have time. And my work schedule and kids and all that kind of stuff don't always really allow for that. But I've kept up with that too, which has just kind of made it very fulfilling for me. But I always kind of knew that, like, I loved the music part of it. I never loved the performing. Like, I don't really like the idea of getting up on stage, just me and a guitar. That's like terrifying, right? Terrifying. So I never really loved that part. But I think it's just about knowing yourself, right? I knew that that's not really, like, I didn't want to be a rock star, right? But so really, for I think the people that do follow that, it's because, and I've had friends that have really followed music as a career and as a passion. And for those people, was just so obvious for them internally that that's what they needed to do, right? And I fully respect that, right? If you are a musician and and that is just who you are at your core, then you should follow that, no holds barred, right? You always have to figure out how to mitigate some of the risk in your life. We'll talk about that later. I think follow what you really want to do. And then figure it out as you go. But I have a lot of respect for people that do both paths. That just music as a full-time job, which just wasn't. I just knew that wasn't going to be my cup of tea.
That's incredible advice, because I think at some point in life we struggle with something similar like that. Like, I have this passion, whether it's sports or singing or thinking you're going to make it to the NBA or you're going to become an actor in Hollywood. But to your point, it's really figuring out, looking inwards and saying, is that really what I want to base my entire life on? And you also have to know and love and be so passionate about it, because it's going to be really hard to beat all the odds, right? To become successful in that aspect as well. So I think what you did was incredible too, where it was, I'm going to continue my passion, but I also know that engineering and business is kind of also my passion in a different way. So that's really cool. We know when you graduated from chemical engineering, your first job, you landed at Pervin and Gertz Inc. You worked there with a team of senior consultants providing research on global energy markets, and you stayed there for about 2 years or so, and then you got recruited by McKinsey. You then worked at McKinsey for about 2 years, and in 2001, there was a lot going on. I mean, the recession was in full force. I believe 9/11 had just recently happened. There was just so much going on. Enron as well was going down. Can you tell us why you decided to just, pack your bags and move to New York City with really no plans or money? And, can you tell us a little bit of what was going on in your life at that point?
Yeah, well, I think that progression that you talked about was sort of me figuring out that there was more to the world than chemical engineering, right? And kind of trying to make my way from a kid with a chemical engineering degree into the business world. That's really where I was trying to go. I had thought about changing my major to business in my last year of college, but I think it would have taken me 3 more years at that point. And so I said, I'm just going to stick with this. Engineering is a great degree. Everybody convinced me that you can kind of do a lot with engineering and just kind of make your way that way professionally. So that's what I did. When I moved to New York, so I was working for McKinsey at the time. And this was, like you said, right after 9/11. I was probably 24. I was young, and 9/11 happened, and then Enron collapsed, which I know the two of you are probably too young to have been working in Houston at that time when that happened. But when Enron collapsed, it was there was suddenly thousands of people that were out of a job in Houston, and a lot of them were kind of young and reasonably smart and had more deal experience and kind of more business experience than I did. And at the same time, McKinsey was, they were, the work was slowing down for them too because of the recession. So I knew that I wasn't, that, and I was on a program that was really just 2 years, and then you were expected to move on. And so I said, I really thought the next job that I wanted was probably in finance. I wanted to learn more about finance, but I hadn't gotten my stuff together enough at that point in my life to go apply for MBA school, to go get an MBA. And so I wanted to learn about finance. And I said, I'm just going to, and I had some friends that lived there. And so when suddenly I was out of a job, I just said, I'm going to pack up a U-Haul and I'm just going to move to New York and I'm going to find one. And I had basically no money. I had a little bit. McKinsey was continuing to I had some severance with them, so they're continuing to pay my salary for a couple of months. And so I said, it'll probably be fine. I'm just going to go and I'm going to see what happens. I think it was, look, I was, like I said, I was young. I had the opportunity to take that risk. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't know, I was single. I didn't have anybody depending on me. I had enough money to scrape by for a couple of months, and I knew I had a couple months of salary that was going to still get paid. So I had a little bit of a safety net, but not a lot, right? So I just said, how hard can it be? And I just went up to New York, and it turned out to be a lot harder than I thought. And it took me a solid, I think 9 or 10 months before I started my next job. And I was applying that whole time, enjoying being young in New York is fun. But it took a solid 9 or 10 months before I found that next job.
How did you still keep that confidence to keep trying to find a role in New York? Most people probably about the 6-month mark would be like, okay, I need to move to another city. Like, this isn't working out. I know you mentioned that you had money to help fund that time probably, but still, even with that, you see the money running down, you're kind of worried. Like, what made you continue to still press on to stay in New York?
Well, that's a good question. It was, I definitely would see that, right? I saw the money running down. I did not want to just go back and move in with my parents until I found something new. Even if I come back to Houston, I still would have had the same issue, right? And I kept thinking that I was really, really close, to finding that next job, and a couple close things didn't pan out. And I think I got lucky sort of in the nick of time that, UBS was looking for somebody that fit the bill for me. I was having those conversations with myself, all the time, trying to figure out, okay, gosh, how much longer can I keep doing this before I gotta move back home? But I'm glad that it all worked out. But there was a lot of time where it wasn't very certain.
I feel like it's one of those things in life where they always say, like, right behind that next door is the opportunity. It's just, you have to get to that point. And it's usually right when you're about to give up. It's those who don't give up, right, that get it.
Yeah.
And you showed that. And so you ended up, like you said, getting a job in investment banking, actually, and then decided to move back to Texas. So the next role was really pivotal in your career. You worked for a small private equity group called 3 Cities Research, where that's when you actually started learning about the oil and gas industry, and specifically on the waste management side of the business. So this job and working for this smaller company, you were able to learn about waste management, and then it was eventually acquired by a group. Getting into that and going from investment banking, finance, New York, Texas, now all of a sudden waste management, like how, without knowing anything really about oil and gas business or really what was going on at the time, how did you make that work? It seems like a very difficult transition.
So when I moved back, the reason I moved back to Texas was, well, a couple of things. One, I was on the equity research side of investment banking, and that was a great finance education for me. But I really wanted to get my hands dirty. Like, I really wanted to kind of be closer to the action. And when you're doing research, you're sitting in a cubicle in New York, and you're doing, kind of a financial model on businesses that you don't really get to interact with very much. And so so it's great education, but I wanted to get my hands dirtier. Also, I met my wife in New York at UBS, and she really wanted to move back to Texas. And so I said, well, I guess if she's, and we weren't married yet. And so I said, well, guys, if she's gonna start looking for a job in Texas, I guess I better do that too. So, so I ended up with a group. It was some people that some of the people I knew from my days at McKinsey. So I kind of had a little bit of a connection there. Some people I knew and trusted, and just kind of dove in to say, hey, look, they were working with really small businesses that needed a turnaround, right? They were businesses that had a decent strategy. This company in particular that I worked on was U.S. Liquids of Louisiana. It had a good set of facilities. It had a really promising position in the market, but just hadn't been run very well and really needed an operational turnaround, needed a new management team, just really needed the basic blocking and tackling to make that business function better. And so they brought me in as the junior person and said, hey, we want you to dive in and help us fix this company. And I didn't know what that meant, but I trusted the higher ups enough to know that they were going to point me in the right direction. And through that time, what was really amazing for me is that they basically plugged me in to every piece of that business. It was a small company, but first it was finance and accounting and getting the reporting right, getting the data side of it right, and then focusing really hard on operations and kind of helping the operations team get the data that they needed to be able to make better decisions and try to figure out where we were going wrong. And then also working with the sales team and saying, okay, look, we've got a terrific market position, but we've got the worst market share out of all the players. Why? Let's figure out how to get that, make that better. So over time, I got to, and this is over a course of several years, I plugged in really, really deep with the accounting team, and then the operations team, and then the sales team, and then also worked on acquisition, kind of evaluating acquisitions and the business development side of things, and the financial side of things, but make sure our balance sheet was well capitalized. And so over time, that was amazing training. And I think some people try to get that through an MBA. That was sort of my MBA, right? And I never went back to school and got it, but really kind of figuring out how that company worked from top to bottom, from the ground up, and then being able to understand how what operations does affects the P&L and affects what accounting does and affects what sales does, and how all that stuff interacts together was really where I feel like I really learned about business. And kind of really learned how a company works, not just learn about, what creates value, what creates a good valuation in a spreadsheet. That's what you kind of focus in on banking, right? But really figuring how a company works, that's where I really focused in on that and learned a lot. And it wasn't to be honest, I didn't feel like that was the plum assignment at the time, right? I was coming from an investment bank in New York, and then plugging into a little oil field waste company in Louisiana and Texas that was, maybe 3 million in EBITDA and losing cash. I way downsized, right, in terms of what I was working on, but I got really granular along the way and kind of built it back up from the ground up. And then over time, just being able to see that be successful over time is kind of where I started building from there.
Yeah, that's incredible. I think, like you mentioned, you downsize by moving companies. And a lot of times we focus on the title or even the role that you're going to be getting, and you're so focused on it because you want to just keep up this incline in your career. But a lot of times, a lot of the guests that we've had on, similar to you, they've taken kind of like a smaller role or something smaller in a company, but that's really what built them over the years. Like you said, you basically got an MBA. through real life work experience, which a lot of times is a lot more valuable because you're seeing how the real work works instead of notebooks. So as you were moving through your career and all the different moves, was there a certain point in your career where you thought, I want to be CEO? You had aspirations to one day run your own company and be that number one in a company? Or was it just kind of like opportunity by opportunity, and then all of a sudden you became CEO one day?
I don't think I set out necessarily to be CEO, but I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. And I kind of think about those things a little bit differently. And I've always kind of wanted to. I've always wanted to run a company. I always wanted to run my own company. I wanted to really create something where nothing was before, right? And I wanted, when I started my career, I wanted to find a way to make the world a little bit better and a little bit different than how I left it, right? I wanted to make a mark. And what I realized over time was, but I had no idea what I wanted to do, right? I knew it was probably going to be something that was more business to business than business to consumer, because how to market to consumers was just sort of beyond me. There's a lot of people that are really good at that. I don't understand it at all. But I always wanted to be an entrepreneur and create a company and create a business. But I'm also one of these people. I'm a person that I don't like to do something unless I feel like I know what I'm doing, right? I know there's a lot of people that are really good at fake it till you make it. That's never been me. I just don't have it in me. I don't like to talk about things that I don't, or kind of express opinions about things that I don't feel like I really know deeply. And so for me, I kind of said, that's what I want to do eventually. But I really wanted to take my time and say, look, I got to build a foundation and figure out where to go from there, and kind of figure out where that leads me. So it was, I think, then I've been fortunate to be able to have the opportunity to take, to number one, build on some successes earlier in my career that put me in a position to be able to take that risk, but also been fortunate to to kind of have gotten to the point where I was able to take some risk, right? And that's another big thing is part of that we can talk about too, is how to think about risk as you're trying to build a business, right? And you're trying to take those next steps in your career, and do you really want to make that jump, right? But I was fortunate to be in a position where I was able to take the risks, and then just was, and then I've been happy that they've worked out.
Yeah. So I think what's really interesting and very true about that is a lot of people always ask, like, how did you do X? Or like, how, even with the podcast, like, how did y'all start the podcast? Or like, how did you start your business? And the thing is we all took that risk in the beginning. It all wasn't great at the beginning. You don't start the business and all of a sudden you're a millionaire. Like, it doesn't work. I mean, maybe for some people, but you have to take that risk, and you kind of need to understand that you're putting yourself out there, whether that be, on a podcast like this, or that be putting yourself out there like money wise. There's a lot of people that take loans out on their mortgages to start businesses. That's a huge risk, and you, like you just mentioned, you took some of these really major risks during your career. I mean, you moved to New York without having a job lined up. You went into an industry you didn't know anything about until you finally started learning about it, going to that, the investment firm you're working with. And then you moved around, and you've done a lot of things that most people would feel very uncomfortable doing. How did you feel like, how did you build that confidence to continue to do that? And can you talk a little bit more about your risk?
Yeah, sure. Well, look, and I admire what you ladies are doing too, right? You've taken the risk to go out and start this podcast. I think that's fantastic. It's a matter of kind of figuring out. So for me, it's always been about taking calculated and measured risk, right? Not just I've never been somebody that just dives off the deep end without having any idea what's there, right? So in the investment world, you kind of learn this framework about risks and mitigants, right? So you take a risk, and if something doesn't work out, or what you figure out how to mitigate those risks along the way, right? So like I noticed when both of you started your podcast, you also have you also have other jobs. And so which kind of is a big safety net for you, right? So it really helps along the way to say, hey, look, I know that this is an okay risk to take. And so you set yourself up well to be able to take a risk, right? And so for me, the biggest risk I think I took was even after New York, kind of later in my career, after R360 was sold to Waste Connections. I left Waste Connections, which was a very good, stable company. I could have had a long career there. But at the end of the day, it wasn't the right fit for me because I wanted to be able to take more risk and I wanted to be more entrepreneurial than they really wanted. And so leaving that kind of good, steady job that would have supported my family for a long time, and then saying, hey, look, no, I want to go create a new business and I want to figure out how to do that. And I don't know exactly what business I'm going to create just yet. To me, that was a big risk. But because of some successes I had earlier in my career, I knew that I had the opportunity to do that. And I felt like, hey, look, I was in my late 30s and I had the ability to take some risk. And if it didn't work out in a few years, I could probably go find another job. So setting myself up well to take those risks was important. But to your point, Jamie, when I started Milestone in particular, things did not go well from at the very beginning. I mean, we made our first acquisition of assets in October of 2014, right? So this is right before OPEC flooded the market with crude. Everything was $100 before then, and then suddenly it was, the market contracted by 75% within the first 6 months. And so we were just like the rest of the oil and gas industry from the very beginning in a knife fight for our own survival. And so all the plans and everything that we had that we had laid out, so this is what we're going to do and how we're going to build the company. It all got thrown out the window a month in to when we started Milestone, and just realized that we had to be absolutely just stubborn and bullheaded about making sure that we did everything in our power to make it successful, and first make sure it survived through that 2015 and 16 crisis, and then also making sure then kind of once we understood that we were going to survive, then we were able to pull the playback book back out and say, okay, what were we? How do we start building this business into something that's that the oil patch really needs? And so, but kind of being able to put yourself in the position to have a little bit of a safety net under you when you take that next risk, so that you know that you can have that confidence that that it's all going to be okay in the end, is really important. And then along the way, just doing everything you can to figure out, okay, where can this go wrong? How do I mitigate this risk? And just setting yourself up as well as you can. But at the end of the day, you have to be able to take those measured risks, right? And I think a lot of people are afraid of taking risk at all. And I would say that I think some people advise, don't take a risk if you can't mitigate it, right? I would say it differently. I say, no, you need to, if you really want to maximize your own potential, I would encourage people to take the risks that they can, but be smart about it, right? Take those smart risks. And for most people, that's more, that people can take more risks than they think. It just requires a little bit of courage along the way and a little bit of thought. But I think most people can take more risk than they think they can. And I really always encourage people to do that. But always be smart about it, right?
I really like what you shared about the calculated risks, and that, you're still an entrepreneur, even though you are being smart about the risks that you're taking. Because a lot of times you only see kind of like what Jamie was saying, where they took this big leap, they jumped off the cliff and everything just worked out. And that's a real entrepreneur, right? Because you hear all of these success stories or overnight success stories, but it's nice to see the perspective of, no, you could also be an entrepreneur, but have a side job. And until your other job makes enough money, then you can leave. So I think sometimes we're taught that it just has to be, black and white. You just got to quit everything one day and go start this business. So I like that you are sharing kind of a different side of entrepreneurship, which is really great. What would you say? Sorry.
And I was going to say too, the other piece of it, I think when people are thinking about starting companies, they think that I need to have this idea that's going to change the whole world, right? You don't necessarily, and I think, you don't have to make it so grandiose before you even get started that you never get there, right? Find one thing that you want to change, right? You guys are doing an amazing job of bringing stories out to light, and advocating for women in the oil field in particular, which I really love about what you're doing. But you find one thing that you can really advocate for, that you can really make a difference in, and one problem that you want to solve, that can be enough, right? I mean, when we started Milestone, the problem that I saw was that there was way too much waste that was being generated in the oil field that was just being left on the ground, that was being left on site. And I knew that operators were doing that not because they wanted to take pollution risk, right? But because there wasn't another option. So I said, look, if we can just go out and help solve this problem, that's not solving the whole world's problems, right? This is not the shale revolution. This is not, I'm not, we're never going to be, we don't have to be Google, right? To change the world. We're changing our piece. And we've done a pretty darn good job, I think, of changing our little piece of the world.
I love that. Yeah, it's true. It's so true, because you always think of like, what is this life-changing idea that I'm going to have and reinvent the wheel? And then you never get started because you're always waiting for this one perfect idea. But I like how you said, right, you do something so small, but create a business out of it. So on the last question, we wanted to know, what is the biggest lesson that you've learned so far as your career has evolved, or something that you wish, someone, a mentor or parent, or that you would have maybe learned in school that you want to share with some of the people listening?
Well, I think there's two things. I think what we talked about taking risk, I think, is a big piece of it. But we already kind of putting that aside. The other piece is what I've really learned is that people build their careers in nowadays not based so much on just the company they work for, but on but around the people and the relationships that they've built along the way, right? So give you an example. At Milestone today, a lot of my management team, not all of it, but a lot of my management team are people that I've worked with at companies prior, right? So people that I've got, my head of operations, you worked with me all the way back in the US liquids days. So I've been working with him for 16 years now through 3 different companies. And I find that as I've developed my career, there's certain people, not necessarily companies, but there's certain people that sort of keep coming back around. And we've sort of built careers around each other, and so take good care of those relationships. Not just try to find a mentor, right? But also your people that your peers, people people that might work under you, people that work in completely different areas too. But develop those strong relationships with the people that you work with and around, because as you continue to build your career, you'll find that, at least I've found, that my career has been built more off of the people that I've worked with rather than the companies that I've worked with. And that's just kind of what has sort of carried me and a lot of people I know kind of through their careers. And that's really the common thread at the end of the day. It's not that you just work for one company, but you might find that over 3 or 4 decades, you're working with the same people. And if you're fortunate, if you find yourself able to do that, if you find a good clan within the industry.
I think that is such great advice. I know in my personal career, that's exactly why I've been able to go to different companies and work, is it's all about the people that I worked with who advocated for me. As they change roles, they're always like, you're the first one I'm going to think of, I'm going to call you. And so I think that is very important to share, is that it's also like your personal brand and what you build. It's not the company that you work for, it's who you are as a person, those relationships that you build and the networking that you do. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing. Just so much great advice throughout this podcast and such a great history that you've had and career. We're so excited to just continue to watch you grow and watch the company grow and all the great things that y'all are doing. So thank you for coming on, and really appreciate you spending the time with us today.
Yeah, thank you both. I really appreciate you having me on. I'm really honored to be a part of the podcast, and a huge fan of all your other episodes too. So I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.